Hi everyone, Miles here with another Digitone tutorial, and in this one I want to show you my general process for creating and arranging live jams on the Digitone, making use of pattern variations. Now, creating songs or jams is of course a very creative process that has many different approaches, but I find it kind of useful to have kind of like a step-by-step plan that I can refer to. This keeps me organized, and when I'm stuck, it helps me to come up with new ideas. Now, looking at my jams structure in general, my patterns rise in energy from left to right. So you can see here we have 6 patterns in this bank, which one bank is a jam for me. And these patterns rise in energy. This just gives me an idea of what energy level to expect when I switch to a certain pattern while playing live. And this doesn't exactly mean that the order is that I go in my live jams from left to right. I just know where is the lowest energy level and where is the highest energy level, which I will show you later. And by the way, if you want to see a more in-depth tutorial on how I set up my Digitone for techno live jams, I have another tutorial on that as well, which you can find linked somewhere up here. Now, step number 1 is creation of a first idea and a first pattern. When I start with patterns, I usually tend to start with the drums and then add melodies on top of that. So with techno, it's quite simple. Let's have a look at the drums here. The kick goes 4 on the floor, and then I try to add more and more percussive elements to that, like for example the hi-hat or the snare or these metallic sounding elements that are in this track. And looking at the melodic parts, I choose a fitting key for the jam. This one, for example, is in C minor. And then I add more melodic layers, like for example a bass, and then maybe this lead sound coming in now, or this arp here. And this I do until all 4 tracks are filled and the pattern is done in my eyes. Step number 2 is finding the right place for the pattern in the jam. Now that I have this pattern, I think about the energy level of the pattern and where to place it in the context of the jam, like I explained in the beginning of this video. In this jam, for example, when I came up with the ideas for this, I had this pattern, which is now pattern 2, was the first one I created. This sounds like this. Yeah, and you can see that it ended up now in the middle of the jam with this pattern with a lower energy level. And this one here with a higher one. So finding the right place for the pattern definitely is an ongoing process, and the place changes while new patterns join the jam, which leads me to step number 3. Step number 3 is creating pattern variations. With the first pattern done, I tend to find variations of the pattern that maintain the character of the jam, but still add more variation to it. So I copy the pattern and add or remove elements and sounds to the pattern. This way I can increase the energy level or decrease it. This also works great with changing the parameters in every pattern. If we look, for example, on this track here, the ARP track, and the filter page, we can see that it has different settings for the filter frequency cutoff in different patterns. Like you can see here, this one, the filter is quite open. Here it's more closed, and here it's even more closed. In addition, the amount of notes played, we get 3 different energy levels in all 3 patterns, like you can hear in the first one. Not so many notes played. Here it's a bit more. And here it's even more. There's literally no real break in the notes that are played. So this is a great way to add variation and calm down or really boost up the jams. And while I move along and create all these patterns, I always see how the pattern works in the context with the other patterns that are already created. So this way I can see if changes I make work for the gem as a whole, or if it is just too far away from the other patterns and the gem loses its vibe. In this case, I try something else and just drop the pattern. Step number 4 is creating transition patterns. And in this gem, all the white bottom patterns, this one here, are my transition patterns, and I think about different transitions techniques to make smooth transitions between the black top row main patterns, this one here. If you, by the way, want to learn more about transitions on the Digitone, I have another video on 6 transition techniques that I tend to get back to for my gems, which you can find linked somewhere up here. When I do transitions, I also think about which elements of the target pattern I want to introduce in the transition and which of the elements I want to keep for the transition. Let me give you an example for a better understanding. We are starting with this pattern here. And now I want to make a transition to the second pattern of the gem using this transition pattern. I can already cue it up. And now you can hear that in this transition pattern, the ARP is already changing. The melody is different. And now I can make the transition. And now we are in the second main pattern. And you could hear that the new ARP melody that is introduced in the second pattern is already in the transition pattern. And this sometimes helps to make transitions between patterns work even better together. Now, step number 5 is pretty simple. Just repeat steps 3 and 4. I think this is pretty self-explaining. I repeat the procedure until I feel that I have all the patterns I need to get my gem going. Usually this is, in my case, between 6 and 8 patterns in total. You can see this gem here has 3 regular patterns and 3 transition patterns, which works just fine. But sometimes I have the feeling that I need some more, and then I use 8 patterns. So 4 main patterns and 4 transition patterns. So step number 6 is jam with the patterns that we created. For me, this is the most fun part in the creation process. I jam with the patterns, I change parameters and see which patterns go together pretty well. And this way I can already think of a general order for the jam and see how this all works together. So in this step, I also use on-the-fly changes, like slide changes and additions to the patterns and the sounds, just to have everything working together quite well. So in this process, all patterns are constantly changing. And I also think about transitions within the patterns I can perform live, like for example using a delay feedback loop. For example, on this pattern, I have this pattern playing now, and I can go to the delay page and now use a delay feedback loop. And now get back. This is pretty fun. You can experiment a lot, use different techniques and see how this works for each pattern, and then get an idea of everything should be structured and make sense. Step number 7 is thinking about a start and an end for the jam. So when I don't have the jam playing in a set and want to record it, for example, as a standalone jam here on my YouTube channel, I need to think of a start and an end for the jam. And possible questions for finding the right start and end could be: what pattern makes sense to start and which one to end with? In this jam, for example, I started on this pattern here, and I also ended on it, which makes the jam kind of like closed in itself. And another question could, for example, be which tracks of the starting pattern should be muted and which of them should already be there for the start. So in this jam I decided, for example, to start with only drums and bass playing, and then adding several short sounds from the up track by playing them live. Like these two tracks are muted, and I only have the bass and the drums playing, and then I did something like that. So this works really well to come up with new ideas and really introduce the song that you want to make slowly. Another question could be, which of the elements could be slowly faded in at the beginning of the track or faded out in the end of it? Using the volume controls or the filter cutoff works really good for that. For example, if we go in this one and we have this one playing, we can use the MIDI control all function. Now slowly decrease the filter until everything slowly fades out. With these questions in mind, I try out different things and see which combination works best in the context of the jam. So this brings us to the final step, which is step number 8, happy accidents. Now, when I go through this whole process, I'm always looking for these happy accidents that just happen when playing on the Digitone, and then I try to include them in my jams. Because when you perform live, there are always things happening that aren't really planned, but these can really add special things to the jams and make them really, really unique. And that's what I really, really love about the Digitone and jamming with it. I always end up with things that I couldn't have thought of if I just wouldn't have done them by accident. And in that way, I can also learn new stuff about the device and try out new approaches on sound design that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So this is really, really cool and always important if you go through the whole process to keep in mind that these accidents can really, really add up to your whole song or jam that you create. I hope that my process for arranging live jams was useful for you. This works as a good guidance, but it's of course always important to break some of these rules and go some different ways to come up with new ideas. Yeah, I hope this was useful for you. If it was, I'd be super happy if you subscribe to the channel and check out my other stuff like my new EP, which is out now on all major music platforms. I've put a link somewhere down in the description, and be super happy if you just give it a shot. Until then, stay creative and I'll see you next time.